Was Chronicle a great movie to watch? Chronicle. This movie, I feel, is really underrated. It's a great watch and I will explain why in this video. But before we get to that, I would also like to say that I will use some pictures for some scenes that I want to demonstrate as to why it's a good movie, but unfortunately I cannot really show any clips from the movie itself because I fear that my video will get copyrighted and that's not what I want. That'll be a bad spot to be in, so I will explain all my reasons as to why this movie is a great watch, especially if you're into like science fiction or if you're into like teen movies like where the protagonist is relatable. This is definitely going to be a good movie to watch. It's a found footage film. Let's start with the plot because it's basically three teenagers. So we got the main characters, which are Andrew, Matt, and Steve. So these three characters, we can see that Andrew, first of all, let's start with the main character, who's Andrew. He's the protagonist of the movie, but later on he turned as the antagonist, and this movie does a lot of stuff to show his unravel to becoming a good guy, to becoming a villain, and they do it spectacularly. So we got good acting from all the actors. Let's go with Andrew Detmer, because that's the one I'm focusing on the most. Basically, the whole movie, well, majority of the movie is filmed through his camera, so it's like a found footage type of film. And you get to see that Andrew is basically an outcast in the movie. He's bullied at school constantly. He's got an abusive, drunk father who was a firefighter before. His mom is sick and dying. It's unclear whether Andrew's father also abused his mother. We don't really know. But we know that Andrew's father abused him a lot, so that also contributed to his mental state deteriorating. At the same time, the bullies at school didn't help either, so we got a very relatable character represented with a good protagonist at first. We get to see his cousin Matt. They're not really close at first, but later on, once they all become friends, Steve and Matt, they all go down this cave, so it's like a cave that they found in the party when they were partying, which this same discovery also happens to be their origin, like their superpower origin. So the superpowers that they get are telekinesis, and they can also fly. They got super strength, and basically they got like some type of force field that Andrew demonstrates this later on when he blocks all the bullets in a deleted scene in the final battle. But it is clear that they were setting this up for a sequel because the actual rock that they discover underneath is actually very vague, so we don't know how it even came there. But like, if you have ever watched, let's say, Stranger Things, the TV series in Netflix, basically Eleven's powers are very similar to the Three's, except that they are far stronger in this movie because Eleven's once she collapses after she exhausts her powers, but they can actually do much like crazier stuff. Like they throw bosses around, they can fly, they can like throw, cars everywhere. It's like they were much more powerful. Clearly, out of the three friends, Andrew is the strongest one. The movie makes it evident because he's the first one to actually to use his powers like in such precise ways. I mean, obviously, at the first day, he was able to do it properly, but he was able to learn it faster, and I think that's because he channeled his rage and frustration, so naturally he had the most power. But we also see that Andrew doesn't have a good sense of what's right or wrong because one time they were driving away, there's like a bad driver behind them. He without thinking of the consequences, he immediately uses his power, he abuses it and makes them fall down the road. So because of that, Matt decides to, give them like rules how to use their powers, not to abuse them. And then basically the best part of this movie is that we get to see their friendship, the three friends, Matt, Andrew, Steve, like bonding throughout the film. Like their chemistry is on point. Also, the movie since it's filmed through Andrew's camera, all those, flying sequences, all those other scenes, they're like made very realistically. I mean, this movie's budget is actually not that much, but they're killing it with the amount of budget and the attention to detail, especially when Andrew robs the bank later on. Like all those little details that the viewers might not catch, but they decided to put it in anyway. So let's talk also about the other characters, which let's go with Andrew's father because he was probably the one that made Andrew even snap in the first place. Richard Detmer, who is the father of Andrew, basically throughout the film he basically hates Andrew, abuses him all the time. Um, and then Andrew's descent into madness, which Steve, I think it was Steve, yeah, he told Andrew that he can audition for this talent show in his school, which makes him popular for a brief, like a few days. But unfortunately, that popularity was short-lived because during a failed sex scene with this girl named Monica, the girl with the red hair, he vomits in the middle, so that also can make people relate in real life because they screw up in their first try sometimes, so that also adds a lot of bit of relatability to the character Andrew. He goes back into being an unpopular kid again, gets humiliated again, and this time, now he abuses his powers, he completely ignores Matt's rules. Andrew accidentally kills Steve with lightning after he gets up into the clouds after his dad once again, beats him down, which leads to Matt and Andrew becoming more disillusioned over time. They grow further apart again after bonding for the first few hours of the film. And the acting is on point. You can really feel, you can believe it, like the intensity and desperation on their faces, especially during the final fight. Like it all builds up beautifully. So we got the climax at the end. We got all of Andrew's rage and frustration that he has pent up in the first, on basically the entire film, has finally been released out into the world towards the ending. So that's the time when he's trying to rob like some money, but he ends up in the hospital by accident. Then that brings us to the final sequence where Andrew is basically going rogue at this point. His mother has finally died from the illness. His father, Richard, again tries to abuse him, but this time Andrew fights back and completely loses his sanity now. So that leads to a whole battle with Matt and Andrew, which, since we have already seen how Andrew, since the movie went into detail how Andrew became evil, we can really feel sorry for Andrew. Even though he has started causing destruction around the city, basically. We see Matt, who was never really there for Andrew until recently, trying to calm him down, and we see Andrew finally venting out that Matt was never there for him when he needed it, and that led to him being extremely frustrated and feeling alone. So the reason why that speaks out is because I know a lot of people can relate to Andrew as a main character, so that adds more to the charm of the film, combined with the fact that it's filmed through his camera, so it gives off a realistic feel. Like, I know most people don't like found footage films, but movies like Chronicle or Cloverfield are good found footage films, basically. So the intensity and desperation on their faces at the end of the film, while Matt has to make the terrible decision to kill Andrew, all of that was done extremely well. So all the scenes that were important, they were executed well. Like, I couldn't really find any scene that I complained about in this film. Like, in my other critic videos, I usually complain about stuff that they could have done better, but in this film, they killed it. They nailed it. I mean, some of you may disagree with me, but I think that the scenes were done extremely well. The acting was on point, the chemistry was on point, the friendship was believable. So the ending of this movie is one of the saddest because it starts off as a misguided, troubled young man who eventually becomes the antagonist of his own story. So it was very interesting to see Andrew's descent into madness. And then the also one thing I'd like to get into is the perspective change, because oh boy did they do that amazingly. Around the time when Andrew starts becoming evil, we get his whole speech about the apex predator and everything. But now during the final fight, the perspective basically switches to Matt's point of view. So around 3/4 of the movie, we were in Andrew's point of view. His camera, he's filming his camera and everything. That was basically the entire movie up until that point. So now that the story has made it clear that Andrew is now the villain of his own story, the perspective has changed, and now we are seeing stuff from Matt's point of view. So that point of view change, that perspective change, I actually clapped. That was a terrific detail. I think most people didn't really pay attention to that. They just wanted to see how the fight went down. But me as a movie critic, well, I'm not a professional movie critic, but I can pinpoint stuff they did well, and I say that their perspective change was amazing. And that basically wraps up our review of the movie Chronicle. The plotline, speaking of the plotline, it is very simple. Simply, three teenagers find a cave underneath. They go into it and they black out and they wake up with superpowers, but Andrew, being the troubled kid, eventually goes rogue after numerous bad life experiences, and also eventually leads to his downfall. The plot is very simple. I know you have seen it many times, but it's more of the execution of the movie, which was done terrifically. That's why, as I said earlier, Chronicle is a recommended movie to watch. I recommend this movie. Now, as I said before, I'm not a professional reviewer like Rotten Tomatoes, so you just have to take my word for it when I say it's a great movie. But I also honestly feel that most people overlook this movie. It was made in 2012, but I haven't really seen much people mentioning this, so I could be wrong in that it's underrated. But I feel that I should bring more attention to this movie, especially if you are a fan of sci-fi movies, or if you want high school movies. It's like a combination. Like, they combine the sci-fi aspect, the science fiction aspect. They combine the life of a teenager, found footage, and they did all that amazingly. And despite having little budget, they were able to pull it off really well. So that leads to a satisfying product that tells a coherent story. They actually intended for this to have a sequel, so they unpurposely left The Rock as a vague plot point, which unfortunately has been cancelled. So you can actually still read the Chronicle 2 script online. Max Landis leaked it years ago. You can read it online, but the movie is not going to be made, unfortunately. So we are stuck with Chronicle 1, which is this movie, 2012. It's a great movie to watch, and it's recommended. So I will see you guys in my next movie review. Tell me more what you want me to review. I'll review Avengers Endgame. Well, I've already reviewed it many times, but I haven't done a full movie review of it. I've only really complained about a few plot points. I haven't actually done a full review of Avengers Endgame yet, but just leave some movie suggestions down below if you want me to review some more. I'll see you in my next video. It's Raphael out.